This house is way too big for one person, Dad. My daughter-in-law said it with a smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. My parents need somewhere safe. They're moving in next month. I've already told them yes. I nodded slowly, set down my coffee mug, and said nothing. She took my silence for agreement. She was wrong. I built that house with 41 years of work, not metaphorically. I spent 4 decades as a civil engineer, traveling job sites from Phoenix to Pittsburgh, eating gas station sandwiches and sleeping in extended stay motels so that one day I could come home to something permanent. My wife Elaine and I had planned it together right down to the wraparound porch she always wanted. She passed before we could finish it. I finished it anyway. 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, a workshop in the back where I restore old radios. Elaine's rose garden still blooming along the south fence. It wasn't big for one person. It was exactly right for the life I'd earned. My son Malcolm had brought his wife Simone home for Sunday dinner, the same as most weeks. Good food, good conversation, nothing out of the ordinary until dessert, when she folded her hands on the table like she was chairing a board meeting and announced that her parents, Vern and Trudy, were relocating from Albuquerque. Malcolm hadn't spoken. He'd looked at his plate. I noticed that. I didn't argue that evening. I'd spent 41 years in rooms full of contractors who thought silence meant surrender. It never did. It meant I was already calculating load capacity. After they left, I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at Elaine's roses. They'd come back strong that spring. I thought about what I was actually dealing with. Simone wasn't cruel. She wasn't unintelligent, but she'd grown up in a family where need was currency, where the person who claimed the most hardship held the most power. And she'd married into mine without fully understanding that I wasn't built that way. Vern and Trudy were in their early 70s. From what I'd gathered over 4 years of Sunday dinners, Vern had never quite held a job longer than the lease on whatever apartment they were living in, and Trudy believed firmly that family was a resource to be managed. They weren't bad people. They were people who'd learned that someone else usually picked up the check. I wasn't going to be that someone. I called my attorney the next morning. Diane had handled my property closing, and she was direct in the way I appreciated. No cushioning, just information. I explained the situation. She didn't hesitate. You're the sole owner. No one can compel you to house anyone, but here's what you need to know. If they cross your threshold and stay past 30 days, they establish tenancy. Getting them out after that is a court process. Months, minimum. So I stop them at the door. You stop them before the door. A formal no trespass notice delivered before they arrive. Sheriff's presence on the day if you expect resistance. I asked her to draft the notice. Then I called a security company. By Thursday, I had cameras at every corner of the property, feeding live to my phone. By Friday, the gate at the end of my driveway had a proper latch and a new lock. I'd always left it open out of habit. The habit of a man who hadn't needed to defend himself from family before. That habit was done. Saturday evening, Malcolm called. He sounded tired, the way he'd been sounding for months. A particular kind of tired that had nothing to do with sleep. Dad, Simone says you didn't respond to her about the room situation. That's right. A pause. So you're okay with it? I didn't say that. Another pause, longer. Dad, they need help. They can't afford the rent increase. Simone's worried. I kept my voice level. I understand she's worried. I'm not able to house her parents, Malcolm. The silence on his end was the silence of a man caught between 2 people he didn't want to disappoint. I'd heard that silence before. I'd worn it myself, years ago, in a marriage that asked more of me than it should have. I recognized it in my son and it made my chest tight, but recognition isn't the same as rescue. Can we at least talk about it in person? Come for dinner Tuesday. He came. Simone came. We had pot roast, and nobody mentioned Albuquerque until dessert, when Simone set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as pre-negotiated patience. I know it's a lot to ask, she said, but they're family. They're your family, I said. I wish them well. They can't live here. Her jaw tightened. She hadn't expected that. Not the directness, not the finality. You have 5 bedrooms. I do. And I decide who sleeps in them. Malcolm. She turned to my son. He looked at me with something apologetic in his eyes, then looked away. That looking away was what I marked. He'd been coached. Maybe not in those words, but coached nonetheless. To be present for this conversation, and to be persuasive, and to come down on the side of his wife's request when it came to the point. "Dad," he said, "it's just temporary. 6 months, maybe 8, until they find something." The answer is no. I said it plainly, no heat in it. I know that's not what you came here to hear. But temporary arrangements with people who have nowhere else to go tend to become permanent. I've watched it happen to other men my age. I won't allow it to happen to me. Simone's voice shifted. The patience left it. So you're going to let elderly people struggle because you want your privacy? I'm going to maintain my home as I see fit, yes. That's selfish. I looked at her carefully. Simone, I paid for your wedding. I put the down payment on your first car because Malcolm asked me to, and I said yes because I wanted to help him. I've helped when it made sense. This doesn't make sense. She stood. I thought you were a decent man. I am, I said. Decent men are allowed to say no. Malcolm reached for her arm. She didn't sit back down. They left before the dishes were cleared, and I heard the engine of their car back out of the drive faster than necessary. I cleaned the kitchen alone. The house was quiet in that particular way. Houses get when you've sent someone out of them. I didn't regret what I'd said. I knew I wouldn't. But the quiet had texture to it. The texture of a relationship shifting into new configurations. I went to bed early, and I didn't sleep well. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the dinner. Not from Malcolm or Simone. From a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Harding? This is Dale Prescott. I'm an attorney representing Simone and Malcolm Harding. I'm calling regarding the request for your cooperation in a housing matter." I listened. He outlined a claim he was prepared to file, a familial obligation argument, citing an obscure state provision about elder care and family support structures. He said it in the calm, slightly bored way attorneys say things they know are thin. "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It's a legal notice of potential action." "Understood. You'll be hearing from my attorney." I called Diane within the hour. She listened, then exhaled slowly through her nose, which was her version of rolling her eyes. "They can file it. They won't win it. Vern and Trudy are not your dependents. There's no prior obligation established, and the statute he's referencing requires a direct relationship. Your daughter-in-law's parents don't qualify, but we'd still have to go through the process. Yes? And it would cost them more than it cost you, because we have documentation and they have a theory." She paused. "Have you been keeping records?" I had. I was an engineer for 4 decades. I documented everything. I had notes from every conversation, dates, times, what was said. I had voicemails I hadn't deleted. I had the text from Simone that read, "My parents are coming the 14th. Can you make sure the East Room has fresh bedding?" Sent as if the matter were decided, as if I'd agreed to something I hadn't. "Keep documenting," Diane said, "and forward me that text." The 14th was a Saturday. I was in position at 11 in the morning, standing just inside my gate in the November cold with a jacket and a thermos of coffee. Deputy Crane had arrived at 10:45, a quiet man who'd done this kind of thing before and treated it like exactly what it was, a legal proceeding, not a drama. "You do the talking," he said. "We're here for the record." "Understood." At 11:20, a red minivan came around the corner. Vern was driving, Trudy in the passenger seat. Behind them, Malcolm's blue sedan, and behind that a rental truck, actual moving boxes, actual furniture, because Simone had believed this was settled. The minivan stopped at my gate. Vern squinted through the windshield, saw the lock, saw me, saw the deputy. He rolled down his window. "What's this about?" "Good morning, Vern." I kept my voice even. "I'm sorry you made the drive. You can't come in?" Simone said. Simone didn't have the authority to make that arrangement. "This is my property. No one has permission to move in." Simone was out of Malcolm's car by then, walking fast, heels clicking on the asphalt. "What are you doing?" They drove 14 hours. "I told you no," I said, several times, in person and in writing. "You proceeded anyway. That's not my error." "This is insane." She turned to Deputy Crane. "Can he actually do this?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "He's the property owner. He has every right to refuse entry. I'm here to make sure things stay peaceful." Trudy had gotten out of the van. She stood by the door with her hands clasped, looking at the house over my shoulder, at the porch, the garden, the windows. She looked at it the way people look at things they were sure were theirs. "We have nowhere to go," she said. Her voice had a practiced fragility to it that I recognized. "I understand that's difficult," I said, "but that isn't my doing. I didn't create that situation. You're turning family away. Vern and Trudy," I said carefully. "I have nothing against you personally, but I never agreed to this. I said no from the beginning. If you were told otherwise, that's a conversation to have with whoever told you." Trudy looked at Simone. Simone was looking at Malcolm. Malcolm was looking at the gate, his hands in his pockets, and I watched something work its way across his face, the slow, uncomfortable reckoning of a man seeing a situation clearly for the first time. "Malcolm." His wife's voice was sharp. He didn't move. "Malcolm, say something." "What do you want me to say?" His voice was quiet. "He said no. He kept saying no. We should have listened." The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened all morning. Trudy started crying. Vern put a hand on her shoulder. Simone's face went through several expressions fast, landing on fury. "You're taking his side. I'm not taking sides. I'm saying he's right." Malcolm looked at me then, and I saw the exhaustion in his face. Not new exhaustion, but old exhaustion. Months of it. "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have said something sooner." It cost him to say that. I could see what it cost him. Deputy Crane handed Vern the no trespass notice. Vern took it without reading it and folded it into his shirt pocket like a gas receipt. The rental truck driver had climbed out and was leaning against his cab, watching all of this with the professional detachment of a man who'd seen worse. "What do you need from me?" he called to Vern. Vern looked at the notice in his pocket, then at my house, then at his wife. "Drive it back," he said. "We'll figure it out." They left in pieces. The rental truck first, then the minivan, then Malcolm's car. Malcolm paused before he got in. He walked back to the gate. "Can I call you tonight?" "Yes," I said. He nodded and got in the car. I stood at the gate until the street was empty, then walked back up to the house with Deputy Crane. He wrote up his notes on the hood of his cruiser, got my signature on the incident record, shook my hand. "Clean," he said. "You did it right." He pulled out of the drive and I went inside and made more coffee. I didn't particularly need and stood at the kitchen window looking at Elaine's roses, which had gone dormant for the winter. Just bare canes now. But the roots were deep. They'd come back in spring. They always did. Malcolm called that evening. We talked for an hour, the longest real conversation we'd had in years. He told me things I hadn't known, or hadn't let myself fully see, that Simone had been managing the Vern and Trudy situation for their entire marriage, that every financial crisis her parents manufactured had landed on them, that Malcolm had run out of ways to say no that didn't end in a week of silence and accusation. "She never asked you," I said. "She told you, like she told me." "Yeah." He exhaled. "That's how it works in her family. Someone states what's happening and everyone adjusts. That's not how this family works." "I know, Dad. I know that now." He filed for marriage counseling the following week. He told me himself on a Sunday call. I didn't congratulate him and I didn't say I was sorry. I just said I thought it was a reasonable step and that I was here either way. Simone's attorney filed the familial obligation claim the following month. As threatened, Diane handled it with the organized efficiency of someone who'd already won before walking into the room. The case rested on whether I had a legal duty to house Vern and Trudy based on family relation by marriage. I did not. Oregon statutes didn't support it. Their attorney knew it didn't support it. What it did produce was a hearing, and at that hearing Diane played the voicemail Simone had left me on a Tuesday morning, 12 minutes long, increasingly loud, ending with the words, "You will regret making enemies of us. I promise you that." She played 3 others like it. She presented the text messages. She presented the dated notes from every conversation going back to that first Sunday dinner. The judge dismissed the claim, awarded court costs to me, looked at Simone's attorney with the measured patience of someone choosing not to say what they were thinking. Outside the courthouse, Malcolm walked beside me to the parking garage. Simone had left separately. "She didn't know you had all that," he said. "I document everything. 41 years of engineering, you learn that details matter." He was quiet for a while. Then, "The counselor says we have a communication problem." That's one way to put it. He almost smiled. "Almost. Dad, I'm sorry. For all of it, you're my son," I said. "I'll always be your father." That didn't change. This was never about you. We shook hands in the parking garage the way Harding men shake hands, firmly, briefly, meaning more than we say. He went to his car. I went to mine. The voicemail started that night. Not from Malcolm, from Simone. I listened to the first one and then I stopped listening. I let them stack up, cataloged them in my phone by date and time, and forwarded each one to Diane's email. By the end of the week, there were 19. The content degraded as the week went on. First anger, then accusation, then something raw and less coherent. On a Thursday at 1:30 in the morning, I heard something at the front door. Not a knock. A pounding. My phone showed the security camera, Simone on my porch, her coat pulled wrong, hair loose. I didn't go down. I called 911 from my bedroom. "There's a woman on my property in distress," I said. "There's a history of threatening communications. I don't want to open the door." The officers arrived in 4 minutes. I watched on the camera. She argued. She cried. She pointed at the house and said things I couldn't hear. One officer spoke to her calmly for a long time. Eventually, she sat down on the porch steps. I went downstairs. I opened the door. The officer looked at me. "You sure about this, sir?" "She's still my daughter-in-law," I said. I brought her inside, gave her water, sat across from her at the kitchen table while the officers waited on the porch. She looked wrecked. Not performed wreckage, the kind you deploy for effect, but actual wreckage. Something had broken open. "My parents called me tonight," she said. "They found a place in Flagstaff. They said they didn't want to be a burden." She laughed, short and jagged. "They've been a burden my whole life, and they chose now to say that." I waited. I thought if I could fix this, if I could find them somewhere safe, I'd finally be done. You know? Done with the worrying and the fixing and the... She stopped, pressed her fingers to her eyes. "I understand that kind of tired," I said. "I was married to someone who needed a lot of managing for a long time. It gets into your bones." She looked at me. "You never told Malcolm that." "No, I didn't. That was a mistake." We sat in the kitchen until almost 3 in the morning. She called a car. When she left, she shook my hand at the door. Not the way you'd expect, just quietly, like a person who'd run out of performances. The officers filed their report. No arrest. Disturbance of peace, case noted. Camera footage preserved. Diane added it to the file. Malcolm and Simone separated in February. He moved into an apartment near his office. He started calling on Sunday evenings again, not because I asked him to, because he wanted to. We talked about work, about an old radio I was restoring, about the way the roses were coming back along the south fence. In March, he asked if he could come for dinner. He came on a Saturday. I made beef stew from the same recipe I'd made his whole childhood. We ate at the kitchen table, and afterward we sat on the wraparound porch in the cold and drank coffee and watched the light die in the western sky. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said eventually. It wasn't an apology. It was a reckoning, the kind men arrive at slowly. From the beginning, "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," I said, not harshly, just honestly. I kept thinking if I could find a middle ground, some compromise. There wasn't one, I said. Some things aren't compromise problems. They're boundary problems. Different tools. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I learned that late. You learned it. That's what matters. The roses came back in April. Not just survived, they came back heavy, loaded with buds, the way they sometimes do after a hard winter, like they've stored up something. I was out in the garden on a Saturday morning, clearing debris from around the base of the canes when I heard a car in the drive. Malcolm's blue sedan. And climbing out of the back seat, 2 kids, 8 and 5. His sister's children who'd been visiting from Portland. They ran across the lawn before the car door was fully open. Grandpa! I stood up from the garden and opened my arms. There's a particular kind of morning in late spring when the light comes in flat and gold across the porch, and the whole yard smells like warm soil and something green beginning, and everything feels like it's exactly where it should be. I didn't win anything. I didn't beat anyone. I said no to something that wasn't mine to give, and I said it clearly, and I held that line through every test that came after. And what I have now is the same thing I had when I finished this house. Peace, honestly earned, mine in a way that nothing and no one can redesign. Some structures, once built right, can hold against anything. I know. I'm an engineer.